What's up, you radical human? Welcome back. Today, I spoke to Ryan Blaser. He is the founder of Test My Home. They come in and essentially do a holistic investigation of everything that's going on inside of your home, looking through the big five. So we're thinking things like EMF and air quality, water, grounding, electric, light, you name it. This guy knows what could be robbing you of that important vitality. So we cover a lot of ground today, thinking about all of the things that could potentially be draining you and your family of health and vitality, but we focus very much on actionable and tangible items. So I think you're going to learn something today, and I think you're going to walk away from this conversation knowing exactly what you can do today to reduce your environmental exposure to all kinds of stuff in the home. So this is fascinating and fun. Let's get into it. Ryan Blaser, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. I want to let you kind of set up what it is that you do. How would you explain to the average person what you do professionally?
So I'm basically like a functional medicine doctor for your home, just like you would have like a fitness coach or a health coach or a nutrition coach. I come in and coach you on how to have the ultimate healthy living environment, make sure that all the toxins and bad stuff is out of there and all the good stimulating stuff is there to create a true sanctuary for your house.
I love that. I like that framing of a sanctuary for your home too. I think, you know, a lot of the times in the health world, which we occupy, we think a lot about things like nutrition and movement and exercise. And I guess somewhat it slips through the cracks sometimes is the home stuff. And you said like making that home a sanctuary where you can heal and you can thrive, and throwing out the T word, you know, toxins or potentially harmful environmental stresses and things like that. So take me on a little journey there. I would love to know, firstly, like how you came to be aware of all of this stuff. Did you go through your own kind of personal challenge with this stuff?
Yeah, you know, in my 20s, I had a company in Phoenix, Arizona. We were doing nightclubs and big high-end churches and recording studios, nightlife environmental control system. So anything to stimulate the body, stimulate the mind, the lights, the video, the acoustics, all that stuff was great and fun, and we had a good time stimulating the body. But then towards the end of my 20s, I got sick with mold poison. I didn't know what it was. I went to 3 or 4 different doctors. They thought I had stomach cancer, all kinds of things. Finally, a functional medicine doctor did some testing and found out I had heavy toxicity of mold in my body. So I was able to get out of the environment, detox my body, and I realized there's a dark side of the environment. And so I went back to school, got education in building biology, and just learned as much as I could about how the environment negatively affects our body. And then we started this company really implementing both sides, the good and the bad, to help overall environment.
Mold is a crazy one to me because it kind of came out of nowhere recently in social media land, and now everybody's talking about it. And it's like a little bit of a scary topic too, because sometimes you can't see it. Like you said, nobody knew what was going on. They start throwing around the C word. You're like, holy moly, what's happening here? What's the story with mold? How pervasive is it? How might it be showing up for people? What should they be looking for or thinking about?
Yeah, you know, really, it came about because we're starting to build our homes really airtight in an effort to be energy efficient. Well, when we do that, we're not letting the home breathe. And so these toxins that the mold is putting off gathers in the homes, and then we breathe those in. But also, we're building our homes with more toxic material, the glues, the binders, the paints, the flooring, all these things that we're building our home with, that's food for mold. When the food eats those toxins, it makes the toxins that the mold put off that much worse.
Something I always run into with this is like I have a sneaky suspicion because I saw a little bit of visible fuzzy kind of stuff on some floorboards in my house when I was changing some floor. And, you know, when you see that, you're kind of like, okay, if I can see it, that's clearly some kind of mold. And if you can see it, where is it that you can't see it? And one of the questions that people ask me a lot when I talk about this stuff is like, how do you identify it? Is there a good test? And I know this is what your company focuses on, but like, what would you suggest to someone that might have a spidey sense that's tingling that they might be having an issue with this?
You know, really, mold needs 2 things to grow. It needs a food source, which is our home, and it needs water. So really, if our homes got wet, if we had a flood or a leak or water damage, or we live in a high humidity area, these are all big red flags or clues that we could potentially have a mold problem. Now, to go further, there's all kinds of different testing we can do to help determine. But really, when we're chasing mold, we're really chasing the water damage because it's easier to find that than it is the mold.
And your company, you do this. You go into people's homes, you run these tests, you identify, and then what do you do if you find it? Like, how you can kill this stuff? It's going to come back? Like, what's the story?
Yeah, I mean, for one, we want to try to eliminate why is it growing in the first place? Typically, a leak of some sort or water, so we want to take that away. Then we want to physically remove the mold wherever the mold is growing. And like you said, a lot of times it's behind the walls.
Hmm.
We don't see it. We can't smell it sometimes even, and it's growing behind the shower or in the roof or the crawl space. So we want to remove all that. But then the third part, and this is the most important part, is the cleanup process after. So as this mold has been growing over the months and years, it's been putting off biotoxins that are spreading out throughout your house. Just like if someone was smoking a cigarette in the corner of your house, that smoke is going to proliferate through the
Hmm.
house, collect on different things, and the mold spores do the same thing. And so we want to do that really thorough deep cleaning and then just keep the home dry after that. Clean and dry. That's
Hmm.
really the name of the game.
Are there more obvious kind of sources of mold proliferation? Like the other day, I looked at my AC unit that's in the window, and I was kind of like, that seems like a perfect environment for kind of getting moldy. It's wet, it gets rained on, and then it's hot, and then it's humid. Are there other things like more conventionally in the home that if we're not going behind our walls that we could look at as sources of something like this?
Absolutely. Anywhere where we're going to have water, we're going to have the potential for mold. A big one that I always tell people to go look is your toilet tank. It's a place that's
Hmm.
dark and it's damp. When you flush it, it pulls air in. If there's mold spores in the environment, it's going to land inside that tank and start to grow. So just flip the lid over, take a look. Do we see any kind of fuzzy stuff growing? If there is, that could be a sign there's a bigger problem.
Hmm.
But also the washing machine, especially if you have a front loader, you can pull that little rubber seal back and look underneath there. The overflow drain in your sink, get a flashlight and look in there. The seal around the fridge or the freezer where there's potentially condensation around the windows. And definitely, like you mentioned, the air conditioning unit, the coils. That's a really common place to find mold.
If you like, let's say you see it in these obvious places, like you take a peek under the top of the toilet. The maybe the default reaction is like kill it, kill it with fire, kill it with toxins, kill it with bleach, and then we start introducing something else that's potentially harmful. Are there safer options if somebody does see some of this like surface mold? Like, will vinegar do the job? Like, are there some better things, or is this a case of the mold is so nasty that use whatever you can to kill it and just kind of get it out of the way?
Yeah, you want to think about it kind of like if you had weeds in your garden. We want to physically remove it. We don't want to go spray a bunch of chemical on it because now we just traded one problem for another, like you pointed out. So soap and water really goes a long ways. Just a little elbow grease and let's scrub this off and remove it. If it's mold that's growing in something porous like carpet or clothing or drywall, the best is just to cut it out and get rid of it and throw it away. Don't even mess with it. But if it's a solid surface, just clean it off with soap and water. Yep.
Yeah, I like the root cause approach. Like you're saying, like actually just find out why it's happening and fix that. It's kind of what we try and do nutritionally too, right? Instead of just putting band-aids over something, like if you're extremely tired, you could drink more coffee and it temporarily might help fix that feeling, but it's not got to the root cause of why you're so tired. It might be a nutritional deficiency. It might be a sleep issue. So root cause, for health and root cause for the health of your home and your environment. I'm curious for you because you went on your own mold journey. What was helpful in your personal healing? Obviously, removal of either that from your environment or yourself from that environment. What did you do from your own personal lifestyle or diet? Or you said you worked with a functional medicine doctor. Was there like a cocktail of supplements that really helped you heal?
Well, you nailed it right on the head, and that's getting to the root cause. All throughout my 20s, even growing up before I had the mold issue, is all about I have a headache, take a pill. I'm tired, drink coffee, just like you pointed out. Once I got involved with the functional medicine doctor and found about root cause, then that changed my world. And it's like, okay, if something's going on with my body, I need to figure out why, what's causing that, and get to the root cause, the bottom cause, and let's fix that and solve this once and for all. And so that shift in my mindset changed my life completely with my diet, with my fitness, with my relationships, with everything. It's like no more band-aids. Let's get to root cause. That honestly was a huge shift that really changed my world.
Yeah, love it. I feel the same, man. I think that's really helpful frame for people to have. So, we've already, we came out of the gates hot here with mold. That's a big conversation and something that people should definitely be looking for, especially if they've got like mysterious symptoms happening where let's say they aren't nailing the diet and they're, nice and balanced and they're grounded and they're getting sunlight and all that other stuff. And there's just like this lingering stuff that won't go away, like brain fog or some skin issues or something, start to maybe go looking for these sneaky things. Now, some of these sneaky things are invisible too. I'm really curious because you're not just a mold expert. You're not just a this, that, and the other. You kind of look at the home holistically, like I try to look at health holistically. So talk to me about some of the other things that you're looking for in a hold. What are some of the like biggest levers or some of the scariest things for you to look at?
Yeah, so outside of mold, there's 5 other big topics that we look at. So air quality would be the second one. The third would be chemical exposure or chemical usage that we bring into our house. The third would be water quality, the water we're drinking and that we're showering and bathing in. Then the fourth would be the lighting. And then the fifth would be EMF exposure. So, and then you could even go 6, sound and vibration. That's not as big of a one, but that still can be a toxic environmental stressor in the body. But mostly just those 6 are the main ones that we look at.
Yeah, cool. We could go down so many rabbit holes here because I'm interested in all of that. I guess, something I've been thinking about a lot recently, I was actually looking for them before we went live, is my blue light blocking glasses. I like to think about light a lot and your light diet, natural light, being outside and all of that stuff. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in a studio with a big artificial light beaming me in the face so I look good for YouTube and all of that stuff. In-home lighting, what are you looking for to kind of optimize that and make it a little less offensive to our bodies?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is we want to try to mimic what the sun is doing. That's really ancestrally, our bodies evolved in the sunlight. It's no coincidence that we sleep at night when the sun goes down, and when the sun comes up, we wake up. That's because our eyes get those cues from not only the color of the sun, but the direction of the light that is coming into our eyes. Ancestrally, when the sun went down, what did we have? We had candles, we had fires, we had lanterns. That's going to be the orange, the reddish hue. That's straight into the eyes. Okay, when it's the middle of the daylight and you go outside, it's full spectrum lighting coming straight from overhead. That's telling the body to suppress melatonin, to be awake, to be aware, because that's what we had ancestrally to tell us when to sleep and when to be awake. So we want to try to mimic that as much as possible. So for example, right now, middle of the day, I got my overhead lights on in my house. Once the sun starts to go down, those will go off, and then I'll turn my lamps on that are more eye level, and it has the amber colored lights. And then right before bed, or if I need to get up in the middle of the night, it's the red light only at low intensity. But another thing that's important about the lighting inside of our homes, we don't think about as much as the flicker rate. A lot of the LEDs and the newer bulbs, in an effort to be energy efficient, again, they've created the flicker rate. So it's on for a little period of time, then off, on, off. Now that can trigger a lot of anxiety in people. It can, a lot of irritability. People just don't feel well with that flicker rate. So having a bulb that's a consistent glow, again, just like the sun, our bodies really like that.
That's fascinating. You can see flicker rate, right? If you do like slow-mo video on your phone and you look at a light, you can see it doing this micro on and off thing. And it makes sense that would be somewhat disrupting to our bodies that are always picking up the information of our light environment. But I loved what you said about actually not even just thinking about the temperature and the color of the lighting, but the position of the light. And that's really fascinating, actually, like above in the middle of the day, which makes a lot of sense, and then bringing it down more eye level as the day progresses. So that's cool. So you'd have like lamps with different colored bulbs, or you've got some kind of like magic switch or something like that? Or how you setting it up personally for yourself or for clients that you'd go into the home and do that with?
Personally for ourselves, we have the overhead lights that are the full spectrum during the day. And then for the evening, we have the lamps with the amber colored lights in them. And then we have more of the motion sensor lights in the bathroom that are red colored at night, lamps by the bed. But if we have a client that we're working with that they're building their home from the ground up, we have the opportunity to build and design a light system. There's a company called Color Beam that it's called human concentric lighting or circadian rhythm lighting that tracks the sun. It does it all automatically for you. You can set what time you want to wake up. So let's say you want to wake up at 6 a.m. You can set, so at 5:30, it starts to slowly increase the light more and more and more from the red to the full spectrum to where you wake up naturally like you would if you were sleeping outside ancestrally. And then same thing in the evening where it's going to slowly dim the light, get into the red colors at night to slowly fade you out during the day. That's a really cool system that does it automatically, but you need to have Cat 5 wiring and some more things you've got to build from scratch. But if you're not, just do it with the light bulbs and set it up like that, like I do at my house.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I've been kind of thinking about some changes in my own home recently because the lighting in my kitchen in particular is terrible. It's overhead. It's those like high flicker rate, and I want to go something more classical like an incandescent bulb, but they're getting like increasingly harder to find, and then it means I need to change the light fixture. So it's kind of like akin to this diet conversation again, where we've traded health for convenience, essentially. Like almost anything you can get on the road. I know you travel and such, like most of the places you can walk into and try and get something remotely healthy is going to be doused in seed oils and flavored with artificial this, that, and the other. It seems our homes are much the same way. We've gone for convenience at the sacrifice of health. So is that something you're seeing as you've, been inside many people's homes now, that we're just kind of like banging these things up really quick, not really thinking about the consequences of this, and now me and you are left to deal with the unintended consequences of that?
Yeah, that's a huge, deep underlying psychological thing that as Americans, we want things easy, fast, and cheap. But like you said, it comes at a cost. And so we need to reverse that thinking and really analyze how we're doing it. Like I said, with food, fitness, nutrition, everything. And the environment's no different. We're replacing natural things with synthetic things, synthetic lighting, synthetic chemicals, synthetic building material. When it should be natural. That's how our bodies thrive in nature. That's what it needs.
Mm-hmm. Before we dive into some of the other things you highlighted, how do you stay grounded personally, knowing everything that you know about like this whole, oh my God, everything's out to kill us, and going into people's homes and being like, well, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem. How do you like square the circle of like, these are problems, we need to address them, but like also don't panic, it's going to be okay, the body's capacity is there and it will heal? How do you keep yourself grounded knowing everything that you know about, everything that we're talking about today?
It's been baby steps my whole life. It's been a transition of doing better and building more and learning more and just doing the best I can, and when I'm out on the road and I don't have when I'm at home, I've created an environment that's really clean, ultra healthy, and I thrive here. But I know that when I go out into the environment, I'm not going to have that same sort of luxury. And so my body, I just strengthen my body to be able to withstand that as much as possible. But then, like you said, a really good point is don't stress on this stuff, because the stress itself, it can be sometimes way worse than the thing you're stressing about in the first place. So you do what you can, you take the steps, you meet yourself where you're at, and just do the best you can, and don't stress out about everything.
It's a very good point, man. And it's kind of me guiding my younger self in this, because I was the guy that stressed out about everything, trying to micromanage everything. I think you're right. I think the stress in and of itself can be worse than the actual environmental toxins or exposures sometimes. So yeah, try to keep yourself grounded and understand that one aspect of health is resiliency too. If you have a home that you've created as a sanctuary, if you're feeding yourself good food, if you're drinking clean water and you're exercising, that you can handle some of these stresses a little bit better. If you're overburdened and your toxicity bucket is overflowing, that might be a different case, and we got to get in hard and fast with a sledgehammer, but a good little mindset insight there. So the next one I wanted to touch on with you is the EMFs. And this has been a fascinating area for me to dive into over the last few years, just learning that it's not all tinfoil hat stuff. When I first heard this, I'm like, yeah, EMFs, like whatever. And then you start to look at there is actual biological effects, even with EMFs at low frequencies, non-ionizing radiation. And these are all around us, right? Whether it's our Wi-Fi routers or this thing that I want to talk to you about, maybe this dirty electricity, faulty wiring, even microwaves and things like that. Help me understand how you paint the picture for people to understand the EMF story.
Yeah, an EMF, it seems like it's controversial, but really the debate on whether EMF is dangerous or not has been over for a long time. There's no debate on whether it's dangerous. We all know it's dangerous. Where the debate comes in is at what level is it dangerous, and for how long can we be exposed till it really affects our body? And that varies depending on how healthy you are, how big your body is, how strong the strength of the signal is, what the frequency is. These are all the debatable points. And so we're at the point now where we've never been exposed to this much EMF ever, like exponentially more than we have even 20 years ago. And so we're kind of guinea pigging on ourselves, like what is really going to happen when we're exposing ourselves to this much EMF. So from the studies that I've seen, it's very compelling to tell us that we need to limit this as much as possible, because it's inconclusive in a lot of these scenarios, because they don't have the long-term studies yet, because we haven't been exposed long enough. I don't want to be a guinea pig. I don't want my kids to be guinea pig. And so until this stuff comes out for sure, one way or another, I'm going to take the precautionary approach. So I'm going to reduce my exposure as much as possible. and reduce the exposure for my children, because I truly believe that that's what's going to be better for my health in the long run.
I feel the same, and I think it's sensible. The precautionary principle here definitely applies. We don't know. I think even just if you hadn't looked at any science or didn't really understand this, that it doesn't seem like the craziest ideas to me to think about, like, the earth has a frequency. We know it has this resonance, the Schumann resonance, the earth heartbeat. Like, animals use this as a kind of GPS system to navigate. And now we've stuck poles and antennas and all kinds of stuff all over the place. But bringing that inside of the homes, the obvious one being our Wi-Fi routers and Wi-Fi extenders and things like that. So when you think about this, precautionary principle, minimizing this as much as possible, what are the big things you're looking at? Is that Wi-Fi predominantly?
So the biggest one by far is our cell phone. And the reason is because it's with arm's reach almost 24/7, and it needs to get its signal all the way out to the closest cell tower, in which in some cases could be a mile, 5 miles if you live out in the country. And so that requires a pretty strong signal. So that right there is really our biggest exposure. Second would be the Wi-Fi that's around us. Think about how many times you pull out your phone where you don't have a Wi-Fi connection to something, work, restaurants, your home. There's always a Wi-Fi connection somewhere. So really those are the two big ones. And then third is going to be the electrical wire. And you touched on this earlier, the dirty electricity. That's the energies and the frequencies that are radiating off of the wiring that's through the walls in our building, of our homes and our work and our schools. So we're around that a lot of times as well. Even sleeping in our bed, we have the wiring right by our head. In fact, in my house, we turn the circuits off at night for us and our kids, so we don't get that exposure. But those are probably what I see as the three biggest sources of exposure that people are getting.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you mentioned the cell phone, because I think this is slipping through people's cracks a little bit, in the sense that they'll understand the Wi-Fi router. They might turn it off at night. They might have it on an outlet timer. They'll understand distance from it, reduces the intensity of it. Yet then they pull out the phone and scroll social media for 2 hours every day, holding it or putting it in their pocket and not putting it on airplane mode and things like that. So obviously awareness is big here. Little habits will go a long way. I try to be super intentional. If that thing is in my pocket, it's on airplane mode. But, when I have to work or answer an email, have you come across anything that actually helps with the EMFs from the cell phone? Do these cases work? Are they a scam in your opinion? Are they legit? Which ones? That kind of stuff.
So cases actually can block some of the signal, but this is the thing. So phones are smart. They will vary their power depending on how far away you are from the nearest cell tower. So you pull out your phone and make a call, it'll send a quick ping out and says, oh, I got a cell tower a quarter mile away. I only need to be at 10% power. And it does that to save battery life. Okay, so you make that phone call, it's at 10% power. Now I put my phone in a shielded case that's going to block or attenuate that signal. So now when it sends that ping out, it says, oh, wait a minute, the signal's really weak. I need to boost my power up to get a solid signal. And in doing so, now you just made the problem worse, because you boosted that signal now to 100% when you didn't really need to do that. And so I've found with my measuring that a lot of those cases, it makes it worse, because the phone's trying to overcome that blocking just to try to get that signal through.
Man, that's such a bummer, right? I've heard of other scenarios like this where we try and solve one problem and accidentally create another. Like, I know people get so crazy to the fact that they'll kind of try and make like a Faraday cage of their sleeping environment, and now they get trapped in there with the frequencies and they're bouncing off the walls and stuff. And it's like, oh, you feel like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So when it comes to the cell phone, mitigation and less use of it is probably the best course of action here, which I think we can all confidently say we should probably be on our phones less. So we probably just have to put a little bow on that one and just say, get off your phone a little bit more.
Yeah, because that's another deeper psychological issue there, the addiction that we have to our phone and the nonstop connection that we have that has sneaked up on us in the last 20, 30 years. I mean, when I was a kid, I'm mid-40s, when we want to go play with friends, we'd ride our bike to their house. Nowadays, when people interact with, it's all through their phone. And there was a crazy study that came out that shows that now we're at the point where we look more at the virtual world than we do at reality. So looking at the screen, looking at the TV, looking at my cell phone, we're spending more than 50% of our waking hours looking in this virtual device than we are looking at reality. And that's a worldwide average. So you can imagine some of these teenagers, that might be 80, 90% of their lives, they're looking into this virtual world. That's kind of a scary thought, and it's only growing and getting worse.
It's a very scary thought, man. You start thinking about these conversations about AI and such, and I always think like firstly, there's nothing artificial about that intelligence at this point. It's starting to take on its own, kind of living-esque thing. But we are the AI, like people can't even leave the homes or find a sense of belonging with themselves without these devices. They're just tethered to the end of our arms. And it is kind of scary. And I think we have to be very aware of that psychological stuff.
Oh, for sure. And we have to look at AI and the internet like its own entity. It 100% is its own species that we are creating with sensors, with its own intelligence. These devices that we have are connecting us to that. We are becoming integrated slowly and surely more and more into these phones. I think where are we going to be 5-10 years from now when this stuff is integrated, when I have the speaker in my ear, I have the camera in my eye, and it's integrated in me all the time, and my brain is connected to the cloud. And where are we going with this stuff? And where do you draw the line? Where do you say, okay, enough is enough. I'm not going to turn myself into a cyborg, but there's going to be people that are going to want that and welcome that. So it's going to be crazy to see where this goes in the next 5-10 years, because that's where we're headed.
It's going to be wild, man. I feel like we're going to kind of split a little bit to these crazy folks that want to run off into the woods and, put the bare feet in the grass, and these people that want the next Google glasses where they can live this virtual reality. And I think there'll be unintended consequences there, of course, that I think that ultimately at our core as human beings, that's not what we want. I think we want community, and I think we want nature, and I think we're drawn to those things. I think these have become like shiny objects that have distracted us. But I look at those glasses now, and I also think about things like, I know they give you the perception of a world out there when you're in them, but this is very close to the eyeballs. It's very high amounts of blue light. It's probably causing mass amounts of damage to the retina. So there's going to be all kinds of unintended consequences. Another one I think about all the time, I'm wearing a good old $11 Casio digital watch. There's no EMFs on that thing, but I see everybody's got an Apple Watch, and everybody's wearing the AirPod headphones. I get some stick online quite a lot because I always show my wired headphones, and I'm like, wired gang, like if you know, you know. I don't want to fry my brain, and people always come out and this, oh no, they're fine, they're totally fine, they give off such a low frequency, they couldn't be possibly causing harms. Have you looked into the AirPods at all? Do they give you pause for concern?
They do. And so we've measured AirPods. And so on the scale, so at 2 million microwatts per meter squared is when we can start to measure thermal rise in the body. And also in a lot of the European countries, that level is considered illegal and not safe. Here in the United States, the level is set at 10 million microwatts, which is definitely causing harm. Well, even our own government, the FCC, says, okay, past 10 million microwatts, we know it's cooking you from the inside out. That's the cutoff. The AirPods are at 900,000. So we're like 1/10 of the way there to the legal limit. But this is short-term exposure that they're rating these levels on. We're not talking about long-term exposure and what the effects from that, simply because we don't know, because they haven't been around long enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and people could, if they're working, the classic work from home lifestyle now, right? Let's just paint that scenario. They've got AirPods in their ears for 5 hours a day. They have a Bluetooth speaker at the side of them playing background music. They're on the Wi-Fi laptop that's probably sitting on top of the lap and cooking the reproductive organs. They're in an ungrounded home. They've got Febreze in the corner that's blasting an artificial fragrance. They take a work break and they go and eat the lunch of artificial foods. And like all of a sudden you see like this Wall-E kind of existence where it's just like toxin on toxin on toxins. And then you have this overload, and then you have these symptoms, and then you have the explosion in things like autoimmune issues or cancer. It's kind of crazy, right? I do love what you're focused on here in prevention and things like that, but it does get scary pretty quick.
And those are the people that are going to be first to run to the doctor and say, prescribe me a pill because I feel like crap. And that doctor doesn't ask about any of the stuff you just said. He writes them a prescription to cover the symptoms. Now full circle back to what's root cause, and that's really the American way. And that's why so many people are sick and unhealthy and not feeling well. And I mean, you just nailed it 100% on the head. People have got to become aware of this stuff.
Yeah, and in a tragic sense as well, unfortunately, a lot of those people that might be feeling the issues of this and wondering what's going on would go to the doctor, and maybe they listen to Radical Health Radio and they say, hey, this guy Ryan said there is something going on here with, the potential stuff in my home. And most doctors sadly would kind of laugh them, out of the office and say, oh, that's all nonsense. That's all woo. But like you said, I think there's a lot of things that we can't explain here. There's an explosion of chronic diseases that is multifactorial, but it's in our homes, it's in our food, it's in these environmental exposures. And the blessing and the curse of all of this is that people like you exist, and conversations like this happen to have people wake up, because we can't change anything without the awareness, right? So that's why I wanted to talk to you, and that's why I have the appreciation for what you do, because you could potentially be, saving lives. To not be dramatic, that's legitimately what you can do with something like this.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I can't tell you how many people that I talk to or they go out and do work with or go in their homes where they're just like, I didn't even know about this stuff. I had no idea that this mold behind my shower could be making me sick, or these chemicals that I'm putting on my kids are causing these autoimmune issues. People just don't know. They just, the education's not there. And that's really the sad thing about it. Because
Yeah, man.
a lot of this stuff is avoidable. Cancer is avoidable, the chronic illness is avoidable, people feeling like crap. It's all avoidable just by a little education. It's not really that hard once you know the data.
Yeah, I love that. Back to the Wi-Fi real quick before we move on. Is there a case to be made, if people have it in their, their budgets, or, they don't mind a few wires running around the house, would hardwiring Wi-Fi to your computer or your local networks be a smart idea for reducing kind of free floating Wi-Fi, let's call it?
So I can tell you that I went completely Wi-Fi free about 7 years ago. Hardwire. I haven't gone back to Wi-Fi. And at that time, I was taking Adderall for adult ADD because of brain fog. I couldn't think as clear. I wasn't as sharp. When I went completely Wi-Fi free and got rid of all the wireless devices in my home and lowered my EMF significantly, I was able to get off of the Adderall, and I haven't had to use Adderall ever since then. I've like no prescription drugs because my brain just started working clearly again. And so I think that's a huge one that people are missing the boat on, especially if you're an entrepreneur or a student or anybody just wants to think clearly. Getting rid of Wi-Fi is a huge game changer. You're going to notice a huge difference in the way your brain works.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about, man. Just like your case study there, but how many millions of people across the Western developed world in particular are suffering with crippling rates of anxiety that are just, kind of going through the roof, and how much of that could be tied to something that they would be completely unaware of, which is, yeah, I mean, there's issues with too much social media consumption and such, but like the invisible stuff again, like the Wi-Fi itself could be causing just a low grade stressor that's manifesting itself as anxiety.
Yeah. And I want to be clear too, we're not telling people to live in a cave and go out in the woods and hide either. We still want to use technology. I'm in my office sometimes 8, 10 hours a day doing podcasts and speaking and consultations. But you know what? I'm doing it with a hardwired device. I'm doing it with wired headphones. I'm doing it with a wired microphone. All the EMF is eliminated in my house, and I'm using everything wired, and I'm using it responsibly. And so that's really the big difference, is you can still have this technology, just do it in a responsible manner.
Yeah, I love that. And this is a nice segue into a conversation I wanted to have with you today, because I'm a little bit, I need clarity on it in terms of one of the things that I thought, and I
This is really important because, like you mentioned earlier, the earth has a heartbeat, and that heartbeat is in tune with our body. The animals and the plants on this earth, we all kind of resonate with this frequency, and it's soothing and it's good for us. We also have ions that can build up in our body, and those need to be neutralized with the earth as well. So it's really, really important to get a physical, electrical connection to the earth. Now, there's a shortcut to do that through the electrical system of your home. The problem with that is that there's a lot of line interference on that electrical system. So you're essentially tying your body into the electrical grid through the grounding system. And with all the testing we've done with our meters and our expensive equipment, I've yet to find a grounding system in a home that does not have electrical issues or dirty electricity or line interference on that grounding system. So the best way is to physically go out and run a wire and a stake and stab it in the ground and run that wire in and connect yourself to earth. That's really the best way to do it, and just bypass the electrical system. That way, you're still going to get some of the benefits through the electrical system. You're just adding on this interference that's unnecessary. And so some people will ground through the electrical system, and they say, well, I don't really feel well. In fact, I feel worse. And it's because now they just introduced a bunch of this interference onto the body that's not necessary. There's another side to this too, more of an engineering viewpoint on this, is that when you are grounding yourself in a home and then you surround yourself with electronics, you can become part of the path for those electrons to get back to Earth. It's kind of like if I'm a lightning rod and I'm grounded and charged electrons like lightning are trying to find its way back, it could see me as a path to get back to ground. And so I don't want to be holding my phone while it's plugged in and charging while I'm sitting on a grounding mat, because now I'm going to complete a circuit where those electrons can flow through my body and cause harm. Same thing on a laptop. If I'm touching my laptop while it's plugged in and charging, I don't want to be grounding. It would be better for me to not be grounding, kind of like if a bird is sitting on the electrical wire. He's not getting fried, but if that bird were to touch ground and the electrical wire, it would electrocute him.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's making me think of, again, I always have these health analogies. This is idea that you can either use a filter or you become the filter. And in that situation, like you're becoming like the filter and all of this is running through you. And I guess that is probably not a good thing because it could fry the system, so to speak. And so you must have, I mean, I'm guessing at this point you've been in hundreds of homes and you said you've basically not seen a home that has a very clean grounding line through the electrical system itself.
Yeah, the only time I've really seen good, clean grounds is in the recording studios that we used to do back in my 20s with that business. And we had to use a lot of electronics to get that grounding to really, really be clean and pure. In fact, sometimes it was $100,000 worth of equipment just to make sure that that ground system was pure. Otherwise, when you would have the recording, you turn when the noise is all the way down and the music's all the way down. If you hear any fuzz or buzzing in the background, that's called the sound floor. And that's because of line interference on the grounding system. So in a recording studio, you have to have that grounding almost at zero. Now, homes, residential, they don't go to those great lengths to create clean, pure grounding systems.
So yeah, I could unintentionally, again, be causing excess harm maybe if my home is particularly picking up on these dirty electricities, these ground frequencies, because now I'm plugging directly into that. And I guess there's probably a scale. I'm sure some homes are better and some homes are probably a disaster, which might explain why some people use something like a grounding mat or grounding sheets and are like, oh, I feel amazing. And other people are like, wait, this made me worse. It could be a case with the home as opposed to the idea of grounding itself.
Exactly. Yes. And just to be clear, we're still getting the grounding effect because the home is grounded through the ground rod. We're just introducing those frequencies, which can make things worse. Yep, you got it.
And with that, the best solution is often nature. So like you said, I know you can use like copper wiring and an actual pin in the earth and kind of run it through a window and like wrap it around your big toe or something like that. But is the best thing that we can do somewhat of a discharge of these ions and prophylactically just putting our bare feet in the grass?
Absolutely. Build that in as much as possible. Right now in Boise, the beautiful weather outside. If I'm at the park hanging out with the kids, my shoes are off. I'm walking with bare feet on the grass. If I'm outside checking the mail or doing some yard work, my shoes are off. If I'm swimming, shoes are off. We're at the beach, shoes, as much as you can. When you're outside in nature, get your shoes off, get those calluses on your feet and just connect with bare earth is ultimately the best way to go.
Love that.
Every time.
Love that. I always say the dirtier the feet, the happier the heart. So I'm down with that message. Is there ever a time when one shouldn't ground or one shouldn't be barefoot? Have you come into, considerations like that?
Yeah, that's a good point too, because if and I should say this about the park too. So if we're at the park and it's perfect grass and there's no weeds anywhere, probably a good chance that they sprayed a bunch of herbicides on the bottom of their feet can absorb some of that in. So yeah, that is a good point. That's where we got to be careful sometimes. Hopefully your own yard and the people listening are using organic materials and you're not bringing pesticides and herbicides on your own property. And so your own yard is safe. But yeah, you don't want to make sure where you're walking, we're not uptaking toxins or chemicals through the feet.
That's a very good point. I think also, like, I know topically you can apply things like magnesium to the bottom of your feet and they have a really good absorption rate. So that would work both ways. If you're standing on a bunch of glyphosate because the local park just decided to try and kill all of its weeds, you're probably sucking that into your skin as well. It reminds me, I live in the countryside now and we're trying to develop like a really thriving little ecosystem where we don't use any chemicals and we're using nature to heal and we're introducing species to control this species, all of that stuff, and it's very natural and wholesome and it's cool. But I lived in Florida before that in one of these like picture perfect neighborhoods and everybody's lawns were immaculate. And I'd walk my dog around and see these signs and it was like, stay off the grass for 48 hours because we just sprayed. Yeah. And you know what? The really sad story here is that whilst we were in that neighborhood and taking my dogs for walks, twice a day, every day, he ended up developing a cancerous tumor. And thankfully he's okay and everything. But I am convinced to this day that he's a dog, super healthy, fed a raw food diet. We went there, he got sick. And in my mind, it was absolutely that, because you can keep yourself off the grass, but good luck trying to keep a dog from sniffing and things like that. And I think he got overburdened with chemicals like herbicides and pesticides and all of that stuff. So that's another one of these environmental factors, right? Like just the chemical exposure. And it's not just outside. These can come into our homes. So what do you look at for the big needle movers in the chemical world?
Yeah, chemical, that's another big one. And so the big thing that I always tell my kids and my clients and just try to live off of, if you don't know what it means in the ingredient, if you read that ingredient and it's a crazy scientific name with a bunch of numbers and 2,4-D chlorodoxide, like if you don't know what this stuff is, don't use it. Don't rub it on your body. Don't bring it in your home. There's so many natural alternatives that we can use for like cleaning, for example. Half distilled water, half distilled vinegar, and a little bit of lemon essential oil, or just peel up some lemons or squeeze some lemons in there. You can clean 95% of your surfaces with just that simple right there. And then baking soda cleans a ton of stuff. Like if you want some skin cream, tallow. I mean, there's so many natural, healthy alternatives to these chemicals. Just a quick Google search online and you can find a ton of this stuff.
I love that. You sound exactly like my wife. That's exactly what she says. You can clean everything with vinegar, lemon essential oil, baking soda. There you go. You've got the trifecta. And I love that you brought up, natural skincare products too, because, we've had conversations on the show before about thinking about what you're showering in, thinking about what you're washing your clothes in and your sheets and everything, man, because everything goes that chemical route for convenience if we're not conscious of it. But then what we put on our skin. So, tallow and natural things like coconut oil if you can't get tallow, or lard if you can't get either of those, or some less nefarious thing than your Johnson & Johnson generic skincare, because exactly like you said, if you turn that thing over and you look at it, there is going to be a dozen things on there. You have no idea what they are. And you kind of eat what you put on your skin in a roundabout way. It's going into your body. So the chemicals are a big one too. You mentioned water, and I'm really fascinated by this conversation. Another thing that I'm starting to think about, I think a lot of the time we think about water in terms of what we drink, and hopefully people are filtering the waters, and I'd love to get your take on that. Some good options for maybe these whole house systems or entry level, countertop systems, but also then we bathe in it and shower in it and all of that stuff. So what's the story with water? How do you try and clean that up as much as possible?
Yeah, clean water is one of the big four. I always say clean water, clean air, clean food, and clean thoughts are the foundation for good health. But what we put in our body as far as the water we drink is so important. And that's some place that I wouldn't skimp. I would invest in good water filtration. And the thing is you can take a lot of the water filters with you. Like if you live in an apartment or a townhome or you're renting, you can buy a nice water filtration system, pay a plumber $200 to install it. And then when you move, just pay him to come and move it to the next place. And you can take that stuff with you. But really it comes down to testing the water where you're at and seeing what it is you have in your water that you need to get rid of. But I can tell you that 95%, 98% of the tap water out there is not fit to drink. It needs to have some sort of a filtration device on it. And so for our home, it runs in and we have minerals. So it runs through a water softener and pulls out the minerals and makes it soft water. And then we run it through a whole home carbon filter, which pulls out a lot of the other toxic chemicals and things that could be potentially in the water. And then it runs through and then from there it goes to the rest of the house. But when it goes into the kitchen area, it goes through an RO system. And then we inject hydrogen into it for drinking and cooking. And then for the stuff we actually drink, we run it through a structuring device that spins it out and structures the water. I know that might be a little much, but I think the water we put in our body is so important. It's very important. So go the extra mile and don't skimp on water.
Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me, man. What's that fact we always throw out that, with 70% water or something like that, and the water that we drink is absolutely going to dictate our health. I think you're at the black belt level of water systems there, and we can talk about more of the entry level stuff in a second. But let's say somebody wanted to do that and they had the means available. What's something like that gonna cost or to set up? Like, how invasive is that procedure? Ultimately, it's like you said, it's a really good investment, but what are we thinking here?
15 to $20,000 and then a couple hundred a year to replace your filters. So a significant investment up front, but then once you got it in, you just need to replace the filters.
Mm-hmm. So if you're in your forever home and you have the means, like go the black belt, structure the water, the hydrogen, that sounds amazing. What about like coming back to somebody that's just becoming aware of this? They've been drinking the tap water, and you probably know better than I, but there's some nasty stuff in there. Could refresh my mind on what might be in the municipal water supply in terms of like some of the chemicals, tablets, and things like that.
Yeah, if you're in an area that's reclaiming the water, like maybe in LA or something, you could have the pharmaceuticals in there because they're not filtering out a lot of those. So you're drinking your neighbor's Prozac or the hormones that are in, you're drinking all that. Microplastics is another big one. That's kind of hot topic right now where they're finding microplastics in like 99% of the water supply and in humans. It's kind of everywhere. But also the forever chemicals, the PFOAs, they're finding that now in a lot of our water supply. That's not to mention if we don't have the lead and the arsenic and these other toxic chemicals and minerals that are coming from the ground. And then of course, fluoride, fluoride's added into a lot of the water supply. So, I mean, just those things right there are in the majority of the water supply that people are drinking and bathing in.
Wow. Yeah, the microplastics one is fascinating too. I just kind of deep dived that personally for some research and, came across some pretty shocking stuff. There was one study that stood out to me. I think it was a small group sample, but it was like 15 men. Microplastics in 100% of their ejaculate. The sperm had microplastics in it. There was a study where it crossed the blood-brain barrier. There was microplastics in pregnant women's placentas, breast milk. Like, holy moly, like what are we doing? So it gets crazy. So you absolutely have to filter, because if you don't use a filter, you become the filter. So the entry level stuff in my house right now, before we can invest in something a little more legit, I'm using a countertop Berkey filter. I actually went for some different filters than Berkey's own ones, but they're like a charcoal based filter, and there's a fluoride attachment on them too. Is that good, or do I need to do some work?
No, it's much better than tap water. Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, you meet someone where they're at and you just make improvements, little baby steps. You don't need to go black belt right off the bat. Unless you want to, always can, but start where you can, even if it's a little tabletop picture, one of those Britas for $30 you get at Costco or at Walmart, get one of those and run your water through it. That's going to be better than nothing. And they have shower head adjustments too, because a lot of times people focus on what we're drinking and cooking in, but they're forgetting about when we're taking a shower and it's nice, hot, steamy, and we're breathing in all this stuff from the water, and our skin is porous. And so these are the pores, they can absorb the chemicals that's coming through from the water. So a bath or a shower can sometimes absorb just as much as drinking the water throughout the day. So we want to make sure that is filtered as well.
Yeah, like that. I'm glad you mentioned that one. I think it's easy for people to just think about the drinking and not what they're bathing in and showering in. So the air that you mentioned, I'm very interested in the quality of the air inside of your home, the air that you're breathing. I am guilty as charged here. I recently changed the filters on the HVAC system and was kind of appalled at how gross they were in terms of the fluff and the debris that had been caught in those. How can we just have good quality clean air that we're breathing in? Do you think about third-party devices that clean up the air and pull out mycotoxins, etc.? What do you really think about there for maximizing that?
Yeah, with air quality, there's kind of two parts to the air. One is getting fresh air in the home. So airtight homes, we're breathing into a big box basically. And the only time we're getting fresh air in a lot of times is if we're open and closing the doors to leave, or we open a window. Now, spring or summertime, or depending on where you live, that might not be a big deal. But come wintertime in Idaho, I guarantee you almost everybody has their home locked up super tight. I always grew up, my dad was like, you're leaving the door open, you're letting all the heat out, close the door, and so that was kind of the big thing. I think we grew up with that mentality is let's lock it up, let's keep it airtight. Problem is now the CO2 levels can go up and up and up. And I have a monitor. So this little guy right here, I just use it to monitor. So we don't want to go much over 800. Outside is 400. Now, once you get to 1500, your brain cognition goes down by 50%. Now, that's not very hard to get that up to 1500. I have a fresh air ventilation system in here, so it's constantly renewing the air. But if I didn't, and everything's locked up, and the kids come home from school, and we're eating dinner, we're all hanging out, that can slowly get up 15 to 2,000. If we're having a party, even 3,000, wow. And then people start getting drowsy, you start getting tired, and I need an energy drink. It's because your CO2 levels are going up. So very critical to make sure we're getting fresh air into the house. That also purges out a lot of the things that are building up in the home. So we got the off gassing that's occurring from our belongings. We have, if we are still using chemicals or fragrances, which we shouldn't be, but if you are, that's building up in the home. We got mold spores, bacteria, endotoxins. Those could all be building up. Dead skin cells. I mean, insect feces, insect parts. I go on and on with all the stuff that's floating around in our air. So by opening the doors and windows and flushing that out and bringing fresh air in, that's a big win. Now, the only time we don't want to do that is if you live in a really humid climate or if there's a lot of pollution outside. Come a couple months from now, we start getting fires in Idaho here in the forest. Sometimes it can be really smoky outside. So in that case, we kind of got to lock it up and we got to do the air filtration. So it's not really a win situation. But for the majority of the time, get the fresh air. And so the second part of that is cleaning the air that we already have in here. And we do that with air filtration. So we have a combination of standalone units. We have air filters in each room, but we also have upgraded filters in our HVAC system. And then I go over to the wall on the thermostat, turn that to on mode. So in the fan, you can either set it to auto or on. I switch it to on, and then it's on all the time. It's continually filtering the air and using that air filter. So make sure you have a high quality MERV, like a MERV 12 or MERV 13 rated filter in your HVAC system. Run that on, and then have the standalone units. I like Jasper is a really good unit that I like just because it's quiet, it looks nice, got a lifelong warranty, and it moves a lot of air. And so, getting a standalone and using your HVAC. So fresh air and then filter the air. That's the two things you can do.
I love that. That's very actionable. With the HVAC system as a whole unit, because that lives outside, I'm in Tennessee in the summer, it can get really humid. Can the HVAC system in and of itself become a source of this problem, potentially like mold, or could that get under, I have like the underhouse piping, I guess you'd call it. Can those be sources of contamination too? And if so, I guess that requires some doctoring and finding, but is that a place that you might be looking?
Absolutely. Both of the things you said. Mold can grow on the coils. So in the summertime when it's hot and humid and that coil shuts off and quits cooling, the coldness on there can attract the moisture, and that's a really common place for mold to grow, especially if the drain pan's not sloped correctly and a bunch of water pooling up there. We can get bacteria growing in there. We can get mold buildup. So that needs to be inspected annually. Pull that out, coils, check them, make sure there's no growth. The second thing you mentioned too is that when ducting is going underneath the house or in the attic, these are typically dirty places that we're not cleaning that can build up a lot of toxins. And so if there's any kind of leaks in the ducting, which most HVAC systems are not 100% leak proof, a lot of them has little tears, little cracks. We're sucking in dirt and contaminants from these spaces. That's going to get thrown out into the living space. So one cue that you can look at is, does your home get dusty easily? Do you notice a lot of dust on your surface? If you do, that's a sign that you have dirty air. And so you either need more air filtration or you need to figure out what's going on with your HVAC system that's causing this excess amount of dust.
That is very interesting. I had a friend, like a mouse or a rat as well, that got under my crawl space and basically put holes in all of the tubing last year, and that created, exactly like you said, it was kind of, the AC didn't feel like it was working quite as good, and there was like this weird explosion of dust, like what's going on? So, I get out the flashlight, I go into the crawl space, I see holes all over the place. It was basically eating through the stuff, taking it to make a nest somewhere. So there's all kinds of weird little things that can happen in these crawl spaces or these lofts where you don't usually go. And if something weird is happening, it might be time to pull out the flashlight and go and investigate.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and it's those little things like that are happening around the country that people just don't realize. They're not thinking about that, and they're just wondering, why do I have a stuffy nose every morning? Why is sore throat? Why are my kids have a rash? Well, it could be something simple like that.
We've covered so much ground today. It can sometimes be a little bit of a whirlwind, especially for the person that's coming into this conversation who's, like you said, never really thought about this. Like, they're in the pipeline of getting healthier and they're thinking about food, and now all of a sudden they're like, holy, there's a lot going on in the home here as well. So like trying to like close out this conversation and ground it in some tangible steps. I know you've given a lot of those, but if you were to, take the layperson and maybe give them a hit list of things that they could do today that are relatively low-hanging fruit that would have a big impact, what are some of the things that you're looking at?
A really big one we didn't talk about is taking your shoes off at the door. Having a really strict no shoe policy, because it's crazy how many toxins we bring in on our shoes. I mean, we fill up our car with gas, there's oils, and crap on the ground. Then we go into the bathroom and there's E. coli and toxic cleaning supplies in the park and the pesticides. So leave the shoes at the door is a big one, especially if you have little kids that are crawling around on the floor. Then it's absolute must. You really need to do that. Second thing is making sure your home is getting properly ventilated. Like we talked about, open that window up, get some fresh air, even if it's a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening, even if it's cold outside or hot, get that fresh air in there, allow the home to breathe. That's really critical. And then turn that fan to on. That's an easy free action item you can do. Another one is turn your electronics off when you're not using them, the practical avoidance thing. So if we don't need to use Wi-Fi at night, turn that sucker off. Put it on a timer so that it does it automatically for you in the background. If you only play the PlayStation once a week, but it's sitting there on the whole time radiating you, just put it on a switch and turn that thing off. And that same thing, like if you had a printer right next to you and you only use it once a week, turn it off unless you actually need it and then turn it on. That's going to really help your reduction. And then another thing is go through your house, and I would suggest download an app called EWG or Think Dirty and scan. It's got a little barcode scanner. You can scan all your personal care products, your cosmetics, your cleaning supplies, and it rates it on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being very toxic and dangerous, and 1 being your baby could drink it. And so go through your house, say, okay, I'm going to keep everything 3 and less, and just pick a Saturday and go through all of your cupboards, all your cabinets, and get rid of all your toxic chemicals that you don't need anymore. If you do use it regularly, find a healthy alternative and replace it. Also, at the same time, you could go through your kitchen and get rid of all your plastics. Plastics, the microplastics like we talk about, showing up everywhere, not good for the body. And in the kitchen is a big source that we're ingesting and we're breathing it in, especially have little cutting boards that are plastic. Every time you cut up your steak on there, you're eating some of that. Get rid of all your plastics. And then try to stick with the natural lighting as much as possible, and then get outside and ground yourself. I mean, if you could do those things, those are all pretty big wins, and they're all free, easy to do.
Yeah, I love that. It seems very actionable and inspiring. You've given me some ideas too. I like to think I'm pretty clued up on this, but you've got some wheels turning, so I think that's really helpful. Where can people go to seek your services? Are you just based in Idaho right now? Or are you trying to branch out? And do you do education elsewhere, like podcasting, website, socials, all of that stuff? Floor is yours.
Yeah, so on our website, testmyhome.com, you can go there, and we do have a lot of podcasts like we've done like this, which I think is a good place for people to start. At least get educated, learn. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, things you can do. Go through the podcast. When you get to a point where you feel like you need our help or our guidance, we offer phone consultations where you can just jump on and you can schedule that right from our homepage, schedule a consultation with me or one of our team, and we'll do a virtual walkthrough of your house and talk about all the things we can do to fix it and the low-hanging fruit. And then if you need us to come out to your house, if you're in Idaho, it's a little more affordable. If you're outside of Idaho, we do travel. Of course, it's more expensive. You got to pay the travel fees and airplane and all that stuff. But we do travel anywhere from Costa Rica to Alaska to Florida. I mean, we're kind of all over the place. But we also have a remote testing kit, which is our most unique option, where we can send you a lot of the testing equipment, and it comes with instructional videos, and you can collect dust samples and water samples, and you get a little EMF meter, and you get an air quality meter that you can monitor your home with. You get to keep it. And I really think that's a good place for people to start. At least do that once in your house and go through and make sure there's nothing in there that's going to cause any issues. For like radon, for example, you can't smell or taste radon, but it's the second leading cause of lung cancer. And it kills 20,000 people a year. They just wake up and one day you have lung cancer, and it's something that's completely avoidable. Just a quick sensor and we can see if that's an issue in your house. So really, really want to stress that with people. We really need to find this stuff out. Just make sure that there's nothing that's causing any kind of sickness or illness, or if you're not feeling well and medicine or all the healthy stuff you're doing, diet, exercise doesn't seem to fix it, look to the environment. What's going on in the environment around you? Because that could be one of the causes why you're not feeling well.
Well said. I love the idea of that home testing option and kit too. I'm definitely going to look into that for me personally. Like I said, I've been deep diving this stuff and trying to figure it all out. And I think ultimately, like you said, education is motivation. And if a lot of this stuff is kind of hidden and otherwise you won't know it until it's either too late or you're, down a 12-year battle with mysterious health symptoms, then let's get ahead of this stuff if we can. So I really appreciate your information and the way you communicate it. I think it's, like we said, it can feel like a scary conversation. There's a lot out there, but I think it's more of an empowering conversation that like there is a lot we can do as well. Like there is some obvious problems, but there's a lot we can do. And I think you've laid out some of those options really well, man. So I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks for giving me a platform to speak about this stuff and help spread the word. It's much needed.
Let's do it, my friend. Thank you. Stay radical. One more time, the website?
testmyhome.com, and also same with our Instagram at testmyhome.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ryan. Keep fighting the good fight, man. And we will see you all next week. All right, friends. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.